Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. Hope all is well. Happy Friday. It's almost the weekend. While we're waiting for others to come in, make sure that you have completed your Who Killed Barry. That needs to be uploaded today. Uh, we're going on to anthropology. All right, a lot of folks late this morning. Ooh. All right, looks like a lot of people still need to turn in Who Killed Barry. So please let's work on let's take the first part of the lesson to finish that up and get that submitted today. Everybody else, it's got about 10 people who are actually finished. Hope you enjoyed that one. I thought it was neat that you could do a 360 investigation and be a real crime scene investigator and interview people. And so that was one of the more interesting activities that we'll do this year. All right, so for those of you who are finished, go ahead and start looking at the forensic anthropology module overview. So I'm going to give, let's see, till 9 o'clock for folks to get caught up finishing. If you owe anything else that you haven't done, this would be a good time to do it. And again, if you are already finished with Who Killed Barry, um, read the forensic anthropology module. Okay, good morning. Good morning. I just let quite a few people in. You please take until 9 o'clock to finish working on Who Killed Barry. Make sure that that is finished. You've completed the worksheet. If you still have any trouble with that, let me know. 9 o'clock. We'll give you till 9 o'clock, and after that, you're on your own. Again, for those who are finished, we are moving on to the forensic anthropology unit. So please give that a read. Now, with that unit, there's a lot of conversation about all the bones in the body and why knowing about the bones in the body is important. Good morning. We have until 9 o'clock to turn in Who Killed Barry, and then we're moving on to forensic anthropology. Also, it's Friday. I do tutorials on Tuesdays and Fridays from 1:30 to 2. So if you need some extra help, extra time, extra explanations on something reopened that's already closed, that'll be a good time to have a moment, a one-on-one. Don't forget that your conclusion needs to cover the 3 points: the motive, the opportunity, and evidence. So you need to make sure your discussion. Good morning, good morning. If you just came in, Yeah, the next 15 minutes to work on Who Killed Barry if you haven't already submitted it. Not a problem. Totally understand internet issues. Uh, so work on Who Killed Barry for the next few minutes, and then we're at 9 o'clock. We're going to discuss forensic anthropology. So please look at the overview lesson for that if you've finished already in Canvas. And you should be working on finishing up the Who Killed Barry. It's due today. If you finish with that, go to Canvas and look at Introduction to Forensic Anthropology. Again, there's a lot of vocabulary there, so please take a look at the vocabulary list. right, you got about another 5 minutes, 4 minutes. Again, if you have finished, we're going to move on to forensic anthropology. So please start looking that over. Look at the essential questions. That is what this unit is mainly about. We have an activity to do it that involves um, the information gathered from an anthropologist standpoint. All right, I will be right back. Let's see if I can make this screen go away. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started on this. If you're not finished, definitely make sure that you get that turned in before the day is out. But again, I want you to look at, we're starting anthropology, and it's the study of the identity and collection of the remains, human remains. Sometimes they don't, the body has been hidden and it decayed, and then they all of a sudden found um, the skeletal remains of an individual. So we're going to look at the information that you can get from the bones. One of my favorite TV shows was Bones, and that's all they did was they solved the crime by looking at the bone, the skeletal remains. All right, so you're going to show you how to determine the age, sex, and ancestry of these remains. and how important that is in a legal case. Okay, so we want to look at why anthropology is important. Why do forensic anthropologists, how do they determine and differentiate human remains, and what information that they are trying to gather. So again, make sure you look at all of these vocabulary words at some point. Definitely know that this section right here, postmortem, antemortem, perimortem, we're going to talk about that a lot. In fact, we have a little video that tells you, not today, but next time I see you, we'll look at one that definitely shows you the difference between looking at the body and distinguishing these times of death. Okay. All righty. So moving on. Okay. Do want you to read this over, get a little history on the study of forensic anthropology, to that tab, and then we're going to watch a video right now that goes through these details. So hang tight. We'll talk about those in a few. Why is full screen never full screen anymore?
Okay, welcome back, forensic students. Today, our focus is on forensic anthropology. So we are looking specifically at bones and skeletal remains and how these bones and skeletal remains
All right, give me
can be used to help solve a crime.
Let me see something. It's already on your list. Let me look at it from your list. Trying to get it so that you don't have all.
Okay, welcome back, forensic students.
All right.
Today, our focus is on forensic anthropology. So we are looking specifically at bones and skeletal remains and how these bones and skeletal remains can be used to help solve a crime or help identify missing persons. And so we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the role of a forensic anthropologist. Durable, even centuries. So because of their protection for our internal organs, and skeletal remains, if they're found, can give investigators clues into how a person lived, who they were, and then ultimately how they might have died. So forensic anthropology is a division of science that seeks to identify human remains, and this has been used for years to help identify human remains. One example is with the September 11th fatalities. So we had thousands of victims that were part of the attack on the World Trade Center. And so we were left with unknown victims, the bones and skeletal remains of unknown victims. Their families wanted closure, and so forensic anthropologists were called in along with other investigators and forensic specialists to help identify these human remains so that their family could be provided with that closure. This is also a process that's used when identifying victims of war or burn victims or skeletal remains that are found in the woods. Anthropologists are called in to help determine how a person died or who they were before they died or how they died. And when skeletal remains are found, the bones and surrounding area is treated like a crime scene. So the scene is going to be secured. It's going to be searched to locate all of the bones. If the bones are scattered, and then any other evidence that might arise at the crime scene, it will be packaged according to chain of custody, and everything works just like we talked about in Unit 1. So basically the scene is documented and processed. Then a forensic anthropologist is going to be called in to use their knowledge of skeletal anatomy to help identify those remains. And they don't usually work alone. They're going to work with other forensic professionals or other forensic specialists like pathologists or toxicologists or odontologists to help sort of relay the clues, or what one professional might discover might help another professional. So they're going to communicate and collaborate with one another ultimately to figure out how a person died. When the skeletal remains are found, they're first going to be observed and examined to determine if they are in fact human remains. And if the remains are human, a biological profile is going to be created. Now, there's some controversy that exists here. We'll get into that in future lessons. But for the most part, if a biological profile is created, then there's going to be 4 components to that. So we're looking at the sex of the person, the age, the height, and the ethnic origin. Investigators can also, in some cases, extract DNA from human or skeletal remains or even dental remains, which is definitely helpful in an investigation. And some bones and teeth provide extra clues that investigators can use in their quest to identify human remains. So what makes bones so remarkably durable? Well, it's because bones contain calcium and phosphate. They also contain some bone cells. You can see here in the picture sort of the anatomy of the bone structure. Bones provide the framework for our body, so they have to be durable. You can see there's red marrow inside the bones that produce our body's blood cells. Just some facts about bones that you need to know. Adults on average contain 206 bones, whereas a baby contains approximately 207 bones. 270 bones. And you might ask the question, well, why do babies have so many more bones than the average adult? Well, during childhood, bones thicken, they ossify, and they grow longer, and this results in fewer bones in adulthood. So throughout our lifetime, bones are always being produced and repaired and broken down, which also provide clues to forensic investigators and anthropologists when they discover these skeletal remains. Bones increase in length until the growth plate is ossified. That means when the bone actually replaces cartilage. So after the age of about 30, the process begins to reverse, and bones will actually lose minerals and break down faster than they are built. All right, to end today's introduction to anthropology, I want you to do a deep dive into 5 cases. So you can see on the screen here, there are 5 cases that deal with forensic anthropology. They're interesting cases, so I want you to take a second to research each of those cases and just jot down a summary of each case and be familiar with each case before you watch the next video. And in the next video, we are continuing on with our forensic anthropology lesson, but we are focusing on the human skull and what kind of clues the human skull, if found, can give investigators. So I will see you in that next lesson.
Okay, we're going to do a case study on Wednesday, so we're going to put that off till then. And I also want to, let's see how long this is. Let's go ahead and look at the skull one.
How to find the right car
You're
for
going to
you.
need that.
Go to cars.com. Look at the car you like.
Ciao.
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 Fine.
I'll pause that for a minute.
Yeah, well,
All right, so I'm going to do an activity next week, and I'm going to give you three victims, I think four victims, and all you're going to get is their skeletal remains, and you're going to have to put the skeleton together. That tell you whether it's male or female, give you some idea of the age of the person, the ethnicity of the person. So pay particular attention to this one because the skull gives you ethnicity.
welcome back, forensic students. Previously, in a previous lesson, I introduced forensic anthropology, and we discussed the fact that when skeletal remains are found, investigators treat the area as an active crime scene. So they're going to secure the scene, process the scene, but they might call in the help of a forensic specialist, specifically a forensic anthropologist, to assist in determining the identity of the person whose skeletal remains were found. So we walk through just an overview of forensic anthropology, and I told you that in the next few lessons we would take a deep dive into some specific parts of the skeleton that might provide clues to investigators. So what we're looking at today is the human skull specifically, and what the skull can tell anthropologists about a person and how they might have lived, and even better, how they might have died. All right, so as we've learned, bones can reveal possible information about a person's biological profile. Now, by biological profile, we mean their age, their sex, their ancestry, and possibly their height. So the human skull or cranium specifically can give clues to age, sex, and ancestry. So not height, but 3 out of the 4. So those are the clues that we're going to go through and discuss today. We're going to talk about anthropologists can use these clues to determine possible sex, ancestry, and age of the deceased. Now, the skull can often provide other clues as to a person's cause of death. So if you'll look at the picture on the screen, this fracture to the upper eye orbital is indicative of a gunshot wound. So not only would this skull give anthropologists clues as to maybe how a person lived or whether they're male or female or their ancestry, but also perhaps their cause of death. Now, it's important to note that these are only clues. So this is not set in stone. It just provides clues. But the goal is to determine ultimately who died, how they died, and then how long ago it was since their death. Right now, before we go any further, here's what I need you to do. I want you to get familiar with the major bones of the human skull and the anatomy of the human skull. If you're in my class, you have this worksheet, so I want you to pause the video and take the time to familiarize yourself with the different regions of the skull. The reason why you're going to want to do this is as we have our discussion today in our lesson.
All right, you have this in your Canvas account. Okay, not the worksheet, but the parts of the skull. So we'll talk about that when we get back to Canvas.
And we are going to talk about some of these terms, and I want you to be familiar with where they are on the. Now, our forensic anthropologist can read the evidence in a skeleton very similar to the way we can read a book. So the techniques that they use to answer questions in criminal cases can be applied to skeletons of any age, modern or ancient. The stages of growth and development in bones and teeth provide information or clues about whether remains represent a child or an adult.
All right, I
And
paused
the
that to
shape
say the video will be in your playlist, and you might want to refer back to this when you put them together. You're going to have to decide whether they're male or female. So this will help you with a list of how do you tell a male skeleton skull from a female skull.
the pelvic bones can provide evidence for the sex of a person. Anthropologists can look for abnormal changes in the shape or size and density of the bone, and that can indicate things like disease or trauma. Bones marked by injury, like we saw earlier in the picture, such as unhealed fractures or bullet holes or cuts, that can help reveal cause of death. And these trained anthropologists are going to help to identify skeletal clues of ancestry. So we're going to look at all those different realms today. And we're going to talk about how anthropologists specifically are able to do this. Now, this needs to go in your notes. So we're going to start with determining sex based on the human skull. So here we have some characteristics of the male skull and the female skull. So I want you to pause the video and write these down, and then come back and we'll finish our discussion.
All right, so I'm not pausing it long enough for you to write it down, but the video is in your playlist for you to write it down at some time, because you don't have to write it down, but you'll refer back to this again when you need to use it.
And the female skull. So for example, the mandible, and if you're unfamiliar with what we mean by mandible or where it is, or nuchal crest or where it is on the skull, again, go back to this image or do a quick Google search of the major bones in the human skull and familiarize yourself with these regions. It'll make it much easier as we move through the lesson. All right, so going back to the mandible, in a male, it's going to be more U-shaped, whereas in a female, it's going to be more V-shaped. Eye orbitals are also different in male versus female skull. So the eye orbital is going to be more square for the male, more round for the female. And then there's some other differences that we're going to go through and discuss throughout the lesson. Now, I do want to show you an example. Let's talk about the brow ridges for a second. So above the eye orbital, you have the brow ridges, and they are very underdeveloped or gracile for a female. They look very petite versus the brow bones of a male skull. They're going to be more developed brow ridges. And if you'll reach back behind your head and touch the area where your neck muscles join with your skull.
Yes,
this area is called the nuchal crest. And
I see about half of you are actually doing
this area can be very smooth. In males, this area is going to be rough or bumpy. And it's hard to tell if you have a lot of muscle back there behind your head, but you can see on the skull the difference. So you can see for the female skull, it's going to be relatively smooth versus the male skull, it's going to be more rough and bumpy.
This is not a long commercial. Thank you.
This is also some information that you need to make sure that you get into your notes. So the skull can also be used to determine approximate age. Not a guaranteed age, not an exact age, it's an approximation. So investigators or anthropologists use these clues to help determine approximate age. And by clues, we mean the cranial sutures. So the cranial sutures are joints. They're made of strong fibrous tissues. They hold the skull together. Now, during infancy, they remain flexible, and that allows the brain to grow. But over time, they fuse together. So by about age 30, the suture at the back of the skull closes. By about age 32, the suture running across the top of the skull, the one going back to front, closes. You can see that in the image here. And then by about age 50, the suture running side to side over the top of the skull near the front closes. So those clues are important to determining approximate age of a person whose skeletal remains are found. Here's an example of a comparison between a 20-year-old skull. So the skull on the left is a 20-year-old skull, and then the skull on the right is from a 70-year-old person. And you can see the difference in the cranial sutures there. So the 70-year-old person, those sutures have fused. And then you can see the sutures are very distinct on the skull of a 20-year-old. All right, so the skull can also be used to get an idea of ancestry. So features inherited from generation to generation are expressed in the morphology or the shape of the human skull. And many of these characteristics have evolved in response to environmental factors. But analysis of the features of the skull can give us an indication of the ancestry of an individual. Now, by ancestry, what we mean is specifically we're referring to a person's biological background. So skulls can be classified according to 3 biological backgrounds. We have European, African, and Asian. And again, we're referring to the area where a person's evolutionary background is from. So you can see in the image here the differences in the features of the skull from European ancestry, Asian, and African ancestry. And then here you have some written characteristics, ancestral differences between the skull. And if you need to pause the video to write this down, you can do that.
Again, you have access to this.
All right, let's talk about teeth just a second. So teeth are often found attached to the mandible of a skull, and teeth can provide quite a few clues for anthropologists. For example, diet, hygiene, and age. Those are all often determined by observing teeth. We know that teeth develop throughout a person's life, and forensic anthropologists are going to use their knowledge of growth and development to get an estimation of a person's age within 1 to 2 years. It's not an exact age, but they can get pretty close. So you can see from this chart the development of teeth, and anthropologists are able to use growth and development information from known individuals to compare those to unknown skeletal remains to get an idea of hygiene and age. Now, also the skull can give clues as to cause of death. So we know the skull can give information about age, possible hygiene, ancestry, sex, but it can also help us to determine cause of death. So scientists recovered this particular skull from the English colony at Jamestown. And this skull dates back to 1609. And if you'll remember from history, this is during the time when settlers of the first English colony in America were basically starving. So this skull shows markings that indicate that this person, who anthropologists later discovered was a young female, was killed and eaten. So these marks that you see, these 4 chop marks, they are chops that were made to her skull in an attempt to get her brain. So anthropologists were able to determine that this young lady was dead, and then the chops were made to her skull. So that is an indication that they were trying to get to her brain so that they could eat it. So it had been speculated that the colonists at Jamestown during this time of starvation, they resorted to cannibalism, and this is proof that that happened, which is very interesting. So if you have some time, I highly recommend you do some research over the English colony at Jamestown. All right, so tools and technology. Forensic anthropologists are able to tell a lot about skeletal remains by using what we call gross observation. So that's what they can see with their eyes. But they'll often use tools that allow them to see deeper into the bone. And that's what you see here on the screen. So one of the tools that anthropologists use is a microscopy, which uses a scanning electron microscope to magnify bones and teeth. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, that's a magnified bone using electron microscope imaging. Now, another tool that anthropologists use are x-rays. And in this case, when they use x-rays, they're not looking at the surface. They're looking internally into the bone. So this can give a better insight into dental development and bone density. Both help determine age. Not only can x-ray be used to determine bone density and development, but here we're able to see that there is a bullet lodged in the skull. And so that can help give a clue as to cause of death. Now, another technology that's used is CT or CAT scanning. This allows scientists to look inside burial containers, even like a coffin. So you can see that here. So they're able to sort of peel away an exterior to really get inside of a container or a vessel that a body might be inside to get an idea of the bones or the skeleton inside that container, which is very interesting. Now, a newer technology is chemical analysis. So it's basically looking at the chemistry of bones. Now, this allows for retrieval of DNA and can give clues like diet. And let's talk about facial reconstruction to end the lesson today. So, facial reconstruction can determine what a person looked like when they were alive. So, anthropologists are able to take the skull, doesn't even have to be a whole skull, and they're able to reconstruct the face to determine what a person may have looked like when they were living. So, because scientists know how deep our tissues are on our faces, they can use tissue depths to put markers and rebuild a person's likeness just with a skull. So, this is dependent upon sex, ancestry, and age, but can aid in developing a replica, like you see here, of an unidentified skull. Now, earlier I showed you the picture of the skull from the victim at Jamestown. They were able to use facial reconstruction. So you can see here in the picture the skeletal remains that were found. You can see some teeth in the picture. You can see some parts of the skull. They were able to reconstruct that skull well enough that they were able to use facial reconstruction to get a mock-up of what this young lady looked like prior to her death. Just so interesting. If you want to research this further, if you'll go to the National Museum of Natural History, there's a video there called Bringing Jane to Life. It is very interesting how they were able to take bones and then develop this mock image of Jane. So I've got a web address here if you want to do some more digging into this case. Highly, highly recommend you do that before you watch the next video, where we're going to be talking about the pelvic bone.
Okay, so we're not going to look at the pelvic bone just yet. And again, both of those videos are in your playlist in YouTube. All right, so what I want you to do with the remaining time, now some of you still have lesson to finish up. I want you to go through and look at the history. And then I want you to make sure that you understand these descriptive things. I'm actually going to, at some point, maybe next week, maybe next Friday, ask you to meditate on if somebody, I know it sounds kind of gory, if for some unforeseen reason someone found your skeletal remains, what story would it tell? And you need to be able to tell me the story based on them looking at your bones. How would they tell what sex you are? How would they tell relatively how old you are, your ancestry, some structure, any trauma that you might have had. Some of you had accidents or broke a bone or something like that. So think about that. Okay, that's an assignment for next week. All righty. So take a minute to go through and read that if you haven't read it already. And on this page, they go through all of the bone structures that she mentioned. So that's why I said you didn't have to write it down, because they have all of that on this page. So we will kind of go through this real quick next week, but if you've already finished, make sure that you go through these. She talked about markers and age-related bone changes. So please take a look at that. She mentioned certain bones. Mandible is very important, and you should know that the mandible is your jawbone. So knowing about your teeth, um, odontology. Some of these words are tongue twisters. So make sure that you know something about the teeth is already here in Canvas. Your permanent teeth, so that's how they know, looking at your teeth, how old you are. And all right, so this brings us to here. So we'll get to this one next week. That's where we'll start with male and female pelvis. So again, take the next few minutes to do some reading. Um, and then when you studied history, did you know about the cannibalism issue with the colonists? I bet you didn't, they didn't tell you that in your textbook. All right, so again, in the next 5 minutes, 6 minutes, make sure that you go ahead and look these units. Next one. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? All right, I'm going to stop sharing, see how many of y'all have actually turned in your Who Killed Barry, because there was quite a few of you who hadn't. So I'm stopping to give you a chance to do that if you haven't done so. If you have, wonderful. Please do the reading in the time that's left. We're reading all the way up to male and female skeletal remains. You can read that section too if you like. Now with this unit, I didn't do a test with the CSI unit, but with this unit, there will be a test and a lab activity as well. All right, folks, if you have no questions for me, you all have a great weekend.
Excuse me, Miss Harris, have you been able to check on the thing I messaged you about?
I'm going to check on it right now. Give me one sec. Don't log out. Okay, Jordan. What did you, because I'm not seeing any submission. What exactly did you send?